In 1987, the comedy world was buzzing with the news of a prodigy nicknamed the Kid. That kid grew up to be none other than famous comedian Dave Chappelle, who began his career at the age of just 14. Comedy can be a very dark and inappropriate world, which makes Chappelle's beginnings as a teenager all the more impressive. He was not afraid of failure or what was going to happen next for him. He just realized he was good at storytelling and making people laugh, so that's what he did. From his very beginnings as a teenager until now, Dave Chappelle's name has been synonymous with stand up comedy and making people laugh. Even in a time when comedy as an art form is being hunted by bloggers and social media like beasts to prey, Chappelle continues to create and protect comedy amidst a cancel culture society. Chappelle is not merely just a comedian. His time in the spotlight has proved that he is a noble and bold man who's unafraid of authentically presenting himself to the world. In an acceptance speech, Chappelle remembers his comedy origins but with a story about griots. His mother told him that griots were traditional African storytellers who were tasked with remembering the stories and histories of their village. She told him at a young age that he too should try to live like a griot, as storytelling was an extremely noble thing to do. So she began to tell him stories about African Americans and the tensions they faced from MLK to the successes of Miles Davis. She filled his head with inspirational characters. Inspired by these tales and characters, Chappelle also started to tell people stories, quickly realizing he had a knack of making people laugh. There is nobility in dedicating oneself to storytelling, as it's focusing on others' entertainment rather than your own. Comedy at its core is just a form of storytelling too, as it's just remembering and telling different funny and silly stories. Comedians are essentially griots. However, their nobility derives from less serious stories, hoping to distract people from their lives rather than stories of history. Like the noble griot, Dave Chappelle has dedicated his life to remembering and telling people's stories for others' sake and not his own. There is nobility in comedy, but only when created and presented by someone who has what it takes to be a comedian. It requires a person to be very bold, willing to take risks or write jokes about controversial topics. Comedians don't truly know if a joke they're writing is funny until they tell it on stage, each time boldly taking a risk. Chappelle mastered being bold in his life, a good example being his 2019 acceptance speech for the Mark Twain Award. Chappelle came on stage casually smoking a cigarette to the audience's confusion. When he began his speech, he said to the crowd, "Do you think I asked anybody if I could smoke inside? No, I just did it. What are they going to do, not give me the award?" To which the crowd laughed and applauded. It represents how Chappelle does what he wants. He doesn't ask for others' permission, he boldly makes his own decisions. Chappelle continued by explaining to the crowd how he wasn't born that way and how he was a really shy child growing up. It was yet again his mother who helped him get out of this with a story. She told him that sometimes you have to be a lion in order to be the lamb you really are, meaning that life requires you to be bold, especially if you wanted to follow his dreams of being a comedian. He realized that in order to get by in life, he can't always just be a shy sheep, and that sometimes life would require you to be the bold lion. Understanding this early in life allowed Chappelle to be a bold performer and relaxed, quiet person off stage. He didn't have to be bold all the time, but controlling the ability to be bold filled Chappelle with confidence. Confidence that was much needed to reach his goal, the high amount of success that he has seen. Being bold is just a part of what makes Dave Chappelle so successful in his life and career. He is boldly himself and authentically owns who he is. He understood at a young age that although he was shy, comedy was a way for him to boldly share himself with the world. Part of what makes Chappelle's comedy so hilarious is that it's Dave Chappelle's comedy, a genre that stands on its own. No one really knows what subject Chappelle is going to make a joke about because it's usually the last thing you'd ever think to make a joke about. In a recent comedy special, Chappelle even bragged that he's able to write a joke from a punchline, continuing to create his story on stage using only the punchline of kicking someone in the genitals. The story he ended up developing was one about Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, and somehow ended with him kicking his childhood best friend's dad in the genitals. Despite currently being in an era where social media and culture in general is working to be overly politically correct, Dave continues to be himself and tell jokes on any subject. He does not care what the blowback will be or whether he'll offend someone because he knows that he is presenting the art of comedy. Comedy inherently has no boundaries since its creation, and neither does Chappelle. When he thinks something is funny, he writes a joke about it, disregarding what any other person alive might say about it. Dave's ability to be true to himself is not only apparent in his comedy, but in his life as well. In the early 2000s, Chappelle's satirical sketch comedy show was the biggest thing on Comedy Central and one of the most popular shows in all of America. It's what brought Dave his early fame and fortune, and it was loved by people from all walks of life. In 2006, when offered a $50 million contract to do another season of the show, Chappelle denied the network's offer. He denied the offer because the network asked him to have if they could have more influence over what goes on in his show. He wouldn't take any amount of money to change his comedy because it represented who he was. He didn't like the way the network was trying to control his art, and unlike other famous people, he wouldn't allow money to change his stance on that. Chappelle decided to leave the show business and Hollywood altogether, moving back to his home state of Ohio to raise his kids and start a quiet family life. He wouldn't accept any money from a contract. He wouldn't live in some fancy mansion with superficial neighbors, because that's not what Dave Chappelle is, and it's not what he will ever be. He's a bold man from a small town in Ohio who's not only mastered comedy, but the ability to be himself. Since deciding to get back in the world of show business in 2017, Chappelle has shown nothing but success, earning 7 different awards, 3 of which being Grammys for his various specials and SNL appearances. Even despite taking a large break from comedy, comedians all over the world agree that he is still one of the best living comedians of all time. He was lucky enough to find his passion at a young age, but he did not start out the best in the world. He had to conquer a fear of being shy and own his unique personality before he was able to hone his ability to make people laugh for a living. And to this day, Chappelle stands as a guardian of comedy, faithfully protecting the art from a social media climate that seeks to destroy it. Dave once said, "The hardest thing to do is to be true to yourself, especially while everyone is watching." And in an age where followers and likes have become so important, I think that quote resonates more than ever. Learn from Chappelle and be bold, be noble, be unapologetically yourself. Oh, cool. Whew, that was like 20 takes. I don't want to do it again. I just want to say I really miss you guys. I miss this class probably the most out of all the ones that got canceled because obviously it requires a lot of in-person communication. I hope everybody's doing well, staying safe, staying sane. I shaved a mullet into my head last night for some reason. So yeah,